Yes or no to this statement? Obesity is the government's business. We all eat, but do we do it wisely and well? Well, obviously not. So who is supposed to fix that? Well, that's what we're going to have out here tonight. This is another debate from Intelligence Squared US. I'm John Donvan. We have 4 superbly qualified debaters, 2 teams of 2, who are ready to get started. We'll have 3 rounds of debate, and then the audience will vote to choose the winner, and only one side wins. Our motion is obesity is the government's business, and this is a debate, it's a contest. At the end there will be a winner and a loser, and you, our live audience here at the Skirball Center, will choose the winner. By the time the evening has ended, we will have asked you to vote twice, once before the debate and once again at the end, and the team whose numbers have changed the most will be declared our winner. So let's go to the preliminary vote. If you go to the keypad at your seat, our motion is obesity is the government's business. If you agree with the motion, push number 1. And if you disagree, push number 2. And if you're undecided, push number 3. In round 1, the speakers speak uninterrupted for 7 minutes each. And speaking first for the motion, obesity is the government's business, I'd like to introduce the 16th Surgeon General of the United States. He has also served as Assistant Secretary of Health and as Director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Dr. David Satcher.
Thank you. Well, we contend that obesity is definitely the government's business. Let me say that I spent 9 years in government, 5 as director of the CDC, and as you've heard, 4 as Surgeon General and Assistant Secretary for Health. And I have to tell you, I would trade nothing for those 9 years. They were rich years. The people with whom I worked were special. So I am very excited about the role of government in dealing with a problem like obesity. As Surgeon General and Assistant Secretary for Health, I released the Surgeon General's call to action to prevent and reduce overweight and obesity. That report, among other things, pointed out that between 1980 and the year 2000, there had been a tripling of overweight and obesity among children in this country and a doubling among adults. So we did sound the alarm, and even though I was former director of the CDC and we are very selective in what we call epidemics, usually reserved for infectious diseases, we declared that overweight and obesity was an epidemic in this country. By the year 2001, it was 25 to 30% of the American people who were obese. What we know about overweight and obesity from a population perspective is very important, I think, to this debate, because what we know is that it has increased dramatically, but also that it is clearly associated with an increase in chronic diseases, especially what we call type 2 diabetes. Increases in what we call BMI, the way we measure body fat, directly related to an increase in type 2 diabetes. And as you know, type 2 diabetes increases the risk for cardiovascular disease and even renal disease. So we were concerned about what was happening in this country. We were concerned about the implication of this rising rate of overweight and obesity. We were also concerned about what was happening in children. And I think this is really critical. What we found was that children, by increasing overweight and obesity, were now getting what we previously had called adult-onset diabetes.
Dr. David Satcher, your time is up. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our motion is obesity is the government's business, and here to speak against this motion, John Stossel. He is host of the Fox Business Network program known as Stossel. He has received 19 Emmy Awards, and prior to joining Fox, he spent over 2 decades at 2020 on ABC News as an anchor and a correspondent. Ladies and gentlemen, John Stossel.
Thank you. I apologize for holding my hand up. I had hand surgery, and the doctors tell me, hold it up so it doesn't get inflamed. So I'm not saluting or doing anything weird like that. So, Dr. Satcher, I hear you, and it's a problem that people have less physical activity, and it would be good if we ate more fruits and vegetables, and it's terrible that more people have diabetes, but obesity is the government's business. That's a separate issue. So, this is a formula for totalitarianism. I mean, what is totalitarianism if not the view that everything falls within the purview of the state? Mussolini said that. Everything within the state, nothing outside. Okay, that's over the top. I'm not saying that government is like a fascist regime, but it's becoming just as invasive. It spends $3.8 trillion. It's going broke. The philosopher Thomas Hobbes started using the term Leviathan to refer to a powerful central government to which we give up some rights. And he thought Leviathan was a good thing, but he assumed that its function was protecting us from violence. He never imagined that Leviathan would plan our meals. And the founders of this country never imagined that. Now, this isn't everything we should have. We need pollution control rules. They didn't think about that. But government has gone much further. We now have an agriculture department that spends $145 billion a year. Government runs public housing, a war on drugs, a welfare state. And now food too? Well, yes. But if it weren't already trying to do all that stuff and doing it badly, it could better do what it's supposed to do, protect us from criminals and terrorists. And America wouldn't be going broke. But look, I've lost that argument. We libertarians have argued that. We're in the minority. I understand that. Most of you disagree. Most of you want more government. And my debate partner, Paul, he agrees with that. He says government ought to intervene in these areas. But even he says, not obesity, because obesity is different, and government sucks at dealing with it. But he's the obesity expert. I'll let him explain that. All I know is that government keeps growing, and that is dangerous to our freedom. Now the president wants to spend another $300 million or so of your dollars to pay for his wife's Healthy Foods Financing Initiative. And of course, that's in addition to all the stuff we already have, the Let's Move campaign, the Task Force on Childhood Obesity, the School Lunch Program, the Council on Fitness, and so on. What's the result of all that stuff? Since they created it and spent a lot of your money on it, people are fatter than ever. And that's just what the feds spend. The states and localities spend even more. I mean, New York City now bans bake sales in schools. How much has that helped? My colleague, Mike Huckabee, when he was governor of Arkansas, he required every school to measure every kid's body mass index. Dr. Satcher mentioned that. It's a measure based on the height-weight ratio. It's a terrible measure. I mean, BMI index says that George Clooney and Tom Cruise are overweight and Arnold Schwarzenegger is obese. It just mismeasures people. But it's required now in Arkansas. But the kids are just as fat. It's made no difference in obesity in the schools. Some states say we ought to have some taxes on bad food. And intuitively, this makes sense. Let's tax candy. Then they'll eat less candy. They'll eat more fruits and vegetables. So Illinois did that. 6% tax on candy. But what's the result? It's just confusing. What is candy? They decide, okay, a Hershey bar's candy, but a Kit Kat bar, that's food because it's got flour in it. So this enriches the bureaucrats and the lawyers, but it doesn't help anybody lose weight. In New York City, the government requires calorie counts now to be posted in restaurants. And that makes sense. Information is good. So NYU did a study of that and found that, yes, adults say they were influenced by the calorie postings. But then they checked the receipts, and they found the people ordered slightly more calories. Government can't control our personal behavior in that way. And even if it could, we're spending $3.8 trillion and going broke. We couldn't afford to do this even if it worked.
Thank you, John Stossel. So here's where we are. We are halfway through the opening round of this Intelligence Squared US debate. I'm John Dunban. We have 4 debaters arguing out this motion: obesity is the government's business. You have heard the first 2 debaters, and now to introduce our third, to debate in support of the motion that obesity is the government's business. Here is WebMD's chief lifestyle correspondent, a professor of medicine at the University of Maryland, and former Pew Foundation scholar in nutrition and metabolism, Dr. Pamela Peeke.
Obesity is the government's business. You hear from the opposing side that we're looking at a nanny state or food policing. Au contraire, that's not what we're looking for at all. I'm a physician first, and I hail from the front trenches, face to face with my patients, and as chief lifestyle expert for WebMD's 90 million members, click to click with my cyber folks. This is where I practice high-tech touch. I set up a discussion group asking, is obesity the government's business? It lit up like Kyoto at nighttime. It was fabulous. The bottom line was, yes, obesity is the government's business for leadership, education, protection, options, opportunities, infrastructure. No sidewalk, no walk. No park, no play. No bike path, lots of accidents. Bottom line, what they said was, no blame, no shame, no tax, no ban. They drew a line in the sand. And Dr. Satcher and I agree with that. Obesity is the government's business. I'm going to flip now to my public health hat. Government cannot solve the obesity problem alone. A problem as large as obesity, pun fully intended, requires all sectors of society to bring our thinking to the table. So I argue for government-private sector partnerships. Shouldn't be just the government at all. When we initiate a voluntary campaign or an effort, we want to be able to offer people options and opportunities. Because if there is no choice, there can be no moderation. We're in New York City. You have programs here. For instance, Mayor Bloomberg has joined with 500 other mayors with the Let's Move Cities and Town campaign to be able to work, drill down into the neighborhoods, what we can do to be able to improve physical activity as well as nutrition. In addition, the FRESH program, food retail expansion to support health programs, say that 3 times. The food retail expansion to support health program has set up 14 supermarkets in food deserts. This was a private-public collaboration, a partnership that worked. We now have fresh produce out there. And that's really important. And here we see, again, trying to show people that there are simple, small steps, literally, that you can take to be able to help yourself. Voluntary. We're not going to the tax and ban place. We're not food policing. We're reaching out, asking people to hold our hand and say, come on, we can do this together. We wanted to see some good data here. And so in our laboratory, we showed the connection between chronic stress, for instance, and the buildup of that toxic fat deep inside your belly, which increases your risk for heart disease and diabetes. We showed, for instance, that it's not about ELM, eat less, move more. That's so important. However, so much bigger. We forgot the mind. What about stress? New research has just been published showing that children who are stressed, and you know what that's about, in their childhood, at home, at school, eat more. And that's that stress-fat connection that we talk about so often. What are we doing about that? We have a new science called epigenetics. We're trying to look at how we can literally change gene expression, how we turn on and off genes by simply doing easy things like if I eat an apple every day on a regular basis, I get that gene expression, and therefore I'm able to what? Have an increase or decrease vulnerability toward obesity. Or I could just do what so many people do, that nocturnal menage a trois every night. You know what I'm talking about. You, Ben, and Jerry, all together in bed, watching the tube, hanging out, doing it. Doesn't work, all right? What we're saying is putting our hand out. We're trying to say, educate, bigger brain, better choices. Obesity is the government's business.
Thank you, Pamela Peeke. And that is our motion, obesity is the government's business. And now, here, our final debater against the motion, Paul Campos. He is professor of law at the University of Colorado in Boulder and author of The Obesity Myth, Why America's Obsession with Weight is Hazardous to Your Health.
Thank you. I think that the fundamental difficulty here is that despite the great courtesy of the organizers of this debate to invite me, I'd like to start by pointing out that this debate is framed in completely the wrong way. To have a motion that says obesity is the government's business essentially begs the question, because using the term obesity frames the debate as one which is about the supposedly pathological state of people who have a body mass index of above 30 if they're obese, or above 25 if they're overweight. And that in itself essentially tells us that we ought to think about those states as being per se bad, and in fact a diseased or quasi-diseased state. Imagine if this debate were framed as eliminating body diversity is the government's business. I think that would sound a lot different, but in point of fact, there is no practical distinction between those two motions. The assumptions at work here are that a narrow range of body weight is normal for human beings, and that outside that range, variation is a product of poor lifestyle. The overweight category of BMI 25 to 29.9 does not, in fact, feature increased overall health risk. So there isn't even a correlation there between increased health risk and the pathologizing of that body state. The vast majority of people, and I'm going to say this about 27 times tonight, cannot intentionally modify their body mass in a long-term fashion successfully. There is no better established proposition empirically in all of medicine than that. In other words, people, as you all know, or I shouldn't say all of you, but many of you know from personal experience, find it extraordinarily difficult to change their body weight in a significant long-term way voluntarily. Here I want to emphasize, first of all, that we do not know an enormous number of things that we would have to know if we were going to have a rational policy that was based on the notion that we were going to make everybody have a BMI between 18.5 and 24.9, the so-called normal range, which for an average height woman would be between 108 and 144 pounds. Outside of that is supposedly pathological. Here's what we don't know. We don't know how to produce significant long-term weight loss. We just don't. We don't know if such weight loss would be beneficial. This hypothesis has not been tested for the very good reason that since we don't know how to produce it, we can't test the hypothesis. We don't know to what extent, if at all, the generally weak associations between obesity and increased health risk are products of a causal relationship as opposed to markers for other things, like, for example, dieting, weight cycling, diet drug use, eating disorders, stress, stigma, and lower socioeconomic status. We don't know why weight went up among Americans in the 1980s and 90s. We don't know why it was stable in the 1960s and 70s. We don't know why it has plateaued over the course of the last 10 years. We don't, in fact, know whether people are more sedentary today than they were 40 years ago. We just don't have the data on that. We just have a few very indirect markers for that, such as the amount of mandatory gym periods in school, but we don't have any direct measurement of how active people were 40 years ago. We don't know whether people consume more calories today than they did 40 years ago. Again, the data is not available. We do know that public health interventions designed to produce weight loss do not produce weight loss. This hypothesis has been tested. It's been tested in situations where we have had intense public health intermediations that are much more intense than those that we could produce on a population-wide scale, and those interventions do not produce weight loss, either in adults or children. We do know that labeling bodies as diseased is stigmatizing, and we know that stigma is very bad for health, as are stress, weight cycling, and eating disorders, which are other things that are produced by this kind of labeling. We do know that risk factors that are associated with obesity, like for instance hypertension, can be addressed cheaply and successfully through inexpensive drugs that work quite well and increased physical activity, which is beneficial for people of all shapes and sizes, whether in fact it produces any weight loss, which it usually doesn't. Finally, what I really would want to emphasize here above all is that healthy lifestyles don't eliminate body diversity, which is found among people with a wide variety of body types, many of whom fall outside the phony so-called normal range. And so what I would advocate more than anything else is that we ought to focus on harm reduction, not weight reduction. We've already had some invocations tonight of the notion that we don't want to stress people. Here's a suggestion. Stop telling them that their bodies are pathological, because that's very stressful. That's not good for people. And if you say that you don't want to stigmatize obese people, but you just want to stigmatize obesity, I would suggest that that is a protocol that's not going to be successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul Campos. And that concludes round one of this Intelligence Squared US debate. Now on to round two, where the debaters will address each other directly. We have two teams of two here arguing out this motion. Obesity is the government's business. On one side, arguing in support of this motion, David Satcher and Pamela Peeke. They are arguing that we have a national emergency underway, a record of weight gain among Americans that threatens to bankrupt the healthcare system and to break the health of those who are obese. But they also offer hope in the role of government as in its ability to offer leadership and protection and infrastructure in support of the actions of those individuals who do want to lose weight. The side arguing against includes John Stossel and Paul Campos. They are arguing in a two-pronged attack. One is they're basically saying the research is wrong that says that obesity is killing us, and the research is wrong that suggests that we even know how to lose weight. They're also saying basically that whenever Uncle Sam attempts to govern the health of an individual, Uncle Sam always gets it wrong. I want to go first to the side arguing in support of the motion. What your opponents have left hanging out there repeatedly is the notion that government's track record already is terrible, that over the last 20 years, 30 years, as government programs have been put into place, we've just gotten heavier. So take that on. What is the evidence that, in fact, government can have an impact on obesity of individuals? David Satcher.
Well, I think the evidence is related to several things. First, we had a very interesting study funded by NIH in the late 90s, early part of this 2000, and basically showed that if we could get people to be physically active and to change their diet, even if they lost only 5 to 15% of their weight, we could dramatically decrease the risk for diabetes. So I think we do know from that study that it's possible to help people change lifestyles. And I did say help because Pamela is correct. There are a lot of people in this country who do not have access to healthy lifestyles. And it is, in fact, a responsibility of government to make sure that everybody has the opportunity, everybody has access to the opportunity for healthy lifestyles.
But the point of the question goes not just to the theory behind it, but the track record of the government.
The track record that I mentioned was the one dealing with African Americans and American Indians in terms of reducing the risk for diabetes mellitus.
Let me go to the other side. Paul Campos, would you like to respond?
Yes,
Thanks.
right. And it's a study that Dr. Satcher was citing there. There was an average of 2.3 kilograms of weight loss, which is about 4 pounds. The difficulty with citations to the notion that a small amount of weight loss is going to greatly reduce the risk for type 2 diabetes is that a couple things. One, you cannot disentangle the amount of weight loss that is produced, which is generally quite small, from the beneficial effect of the lifestyle intervention. The way that you would want to test that is to say, well, let's look at the people who lost weight and compare them to the people who didn't lose weight if they all engaged in the same lifestyle intervention. Is there a dose response that is related to the weight loss? And the answer is no, there isn't. In those studies, the people who engaged in the same lifestyle changes but didn't lose weight had the same reduction on average in type 2 diabetes risk as people who engaged in the lifestyle changes and did, in fact, lose some weight.
I want to go to Pamela Peeke. You're on the side with the two doctors. Your opponents are basically saying they're blowing up conventional wisdom here by saying you're not quite saying it, but you're suggesting, Paul, that there's not a whole lot of point in reducing your calories and exercising more if your goal is to lose weight. And that just flies in the face of everything that even you stand for in your work, Pamela. So take that on.
I would be more than happy to take that on. Apparently, Paul is not aware of the National Weight Control Registry. This is an ongoing study, almost 20 years old, which has been sponsored by the University of Colorado, as well as Brown University, my colleagues, Dr. James Hill and Rena Wing. The cohort right now is over 10,000 people, including people who have bariatric surgery as well. And these people are known as the successful losers. And actually, Paul, you actually are too, because of your own weight loss, as you noted in your book. You qualify because you had to have dropped at least 30 pounds and kept it off for at least a year. And the grand majority of these people have kept off approximately 60 pounds for almost 6 years or longer. And this is on the average in a very large cohort. So are these mutants, freaks? What are they? These people have determined that they will keep this weight off by utilizing very simple things. One of the most interesting things we found was that the #1 predictor for being able to keep weight off and do this well is to have a healthy breakfast every morning. They are physically active. Are they part of the Olympic camp? No. They basically get out, and the #1 favorite thing to do is walk. And in most of the government interventions, all we're asking people to do is not drop weight so much. That's not where we're going. Losing weight, I'm a physician. People lose weight and do really stupid things to lose weight. That's not where we're going.
So you're
we're going to health. We're going to health, and we're going to fitness.
So what's wrong with the government through schools emphasizing education, information, and encouragement?
Because Pamela said that's all voluntary and talked about public-private partnerships being voluntary. But government isn't voluntary. It said we have a voluntary tax system, but try not paying your taxes and see if it's voluntary. Men with guns will come and make you pay for the dumb programs that they keep creating that don't work and that Paul says make people miserable, and keep growing.
But John, what would be the harm of spending money in a school to put this on the curriculum and keep it on the curriculum?
Because the schools can barely teach reading, writing, and arithmetic.
David Satcher.
Well, I think a couple of things. The goal of these programs is to help children develop lifetime habits of physical activity and good nutrition. We also know, by the way, that children who develop good eating habits and regular physical activity do better academically. They perform better on standardized exams in math and reading. They are more disciplined in school. So the benefits of healthy lifestyles go far beyond losing weight. Now, Paul quoted the statistics about weight loss versus decrease in diabetes. The goal is to decrease fat. And sometimes you can decrease fat and increase muscle and not lose weight, but you still reduce the risk of diabetes. I think you know that as a runner.
So let them learn that from Pamela's TV show and from Richard Simmons. We don't need government.
Here's the problem. Yeah, that's nice for people who do have cable TV. Unfortunately, many people don't have Discovery Channel. So for those poor people out there who have no access, what are you going to do? You just assume they're going to catch it on the tube? Oh no, you're not supposed to be watching TV, because if you watch TV too long, you get this big. So, I mean, you're going round and round. Why not just sit there? Why not do what Alice Waters did in Berkeley at the Martin Luther King Middle School? She built a garden. She had the kids grow the stuff. Kids
Paul
who
Campos.
grow it, eat it.
Paul Campos, and again, just real quick.
Well, I love Alice Waters' cooking, I'll tell you. I think it's awesome. But I think her social policy is rather questionable because she wants everybody to eat like they're an upper-class white woman in Berkeley. And that's just not going to happen, right? For all kinds of reasons. Now, what I want to emphasize here is that the government's theory seems to be something along the lines of people are fat because they have not been given the information that it is more desirable in this culture to be thin rather than to be fat. I don't think that's correct. I think this information is not exactly a state secret. It has been widely disseminated.
Well, let's be clear, though.
David
It's not
Satcher.
the information, it's the opportunity to act on it. I think what Pamela described in terms of in the inner cities of this country, look, you don't have sidewalks. You don't have safe places to be physically active. You don't have access to grocery stores. So what you're talking about is the opportunity
That's
to
absolutely
lead
correct.
healthy
And David
lives.
Satcher, what would be, tell me the government's role in creating those opportunities. Are you literally talking about building sidewalks and encouraging?
Yeah, look what Louisville did. It changed the zoning laws so that within so much area you had to have grocery stores and you had to have parks and playgrounds. So the government can in fact produce the opportunities for people to have access.
Did people lose weight in Louisville when that happened?
Well, I think it's too soon to say they lost weight, but they certainly increased healthy lifestyles. Believe me, the fixation on weight is not ours.
John Stossel, I've been asking the other side for specifics on what the government can do. They're talking about building parks, playgrounds, sidewalks to give people a chance to get physically fit, particularly in communities where we know those things are at a deficit. Take that on.
My understanding is that there are just as many or more parks, playgrounds, and sidewalks as there have ever been. People can exercise if they wanted to. And John, you talked about they're responding to this national emergency. That's the justification for government. And I think you're right. And that always is. The crisis is the friend of the state. But the specialists always have emergencies. It's terrorism or global warming or Y2K. Remember the planes were all going to crash? And the killer bees were coming up from Mexico, were going to sting us all to death, and bird flu and plastic bottles. It's endless. It all requires government to intervene, to raise your taxes, and to limit your freedom.
Pamela Peeke. John says there's plenty of sidewalks and parks.
John? John, where the hell do you live?
Right here in New York City.
Honey, listen, get
They
out
keep
of New
building
York.
new parks.
Get out of New York and live. All right? Go out to the hinterland. Go out to places where people
The
don't
hinterland
have these
is
resources.
one big park.
You know? No?
You don't have to go to the hinterlands. There are many areas in this city and surrounding cities where it's not safe to get out and walk in the street. It's not safe. There's no safe place.
That's right.
It's safer than it
All
used
you
to
have
be.
to-
Crime is down.
I'm sorry?
It's safer than it used to be. Crime is down, and obesity is up.
And it's down in great part because of the same leadership that's now saying we've got to change the way we direct food to people.
I want to move a
We've
little bit on.
got to intervene to make sure that people know what they're eating.
I want to move to another part of the argument that Paul Campos has put out there, where he's basically challenging the scientific underpinnings of the argument that you're making. Dr. Satcher, you said that you discussed the association between obesity and diabetes. You didn't cause it causation. You said an association. But Paul Campos, you're saying that even that association doesn't exist?
No, the association exists, but the relationship is complex, right? I mean, the notion, do we know that diabetes causes obesity? How do we know that obesity doesn't cause diabetes?
Do we know?
Right? In other words,
We don't know the cause of breast cancer. That doesn't mean we don't screen for it. We do know the association.
well, yeah,
Clear-
but
in
David,
public
I don't
health,
think. Do you
we
want to
deal with
just perform mastectomies on women who don't have breast cancer so they can avoid getting breast cancer?
I don't get
Because
the connection.
the connection
Peeke.
Okay,
is.
Paul.
Pamela
Paul.
Peeke.
Whoa. In our laboratory and the laboratories of many of our esteemed colleagues around the country, we've made it very clear that excessive visceral adiposity, a lot of fat deep inside your belly, is highly associated with a pro-inflammatory state, which increases the risk of diabetes, coronary vascular disease, and cancer, period. I have that much literature.
Yes,
to
that's
back it.
right,
In
Pam.
addition, Paul, the information that you presented showing that overweight is okay by me is actually wrong. And that has been refuted by at least 2 pooled meta-analyses published in Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine by my colleague, Dr. Walter Willett from Harvard, and by leading epidemiologists around this country.
Okay.
Basically refuting your
Great.
data.
Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, well, first of all, visceral body fat can be very effectively dealt with through changes in activity levels. It's
But are you
not gonna
conceding that there's a relationship between
There
visceral
is
body
a
fat and...
correlation between visceral body fat and increased health risks. That's quite true. But the notion, look, again, I want to emphasize, there's the willingness to talk out of both sides of the mouth on this issue is just astonishing to me. You have people come in here and say, obesity, 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 right? We have this huge crisis. And then I point out, this is a bunch of nonsense. And then it gets flipped around into, well, we're not really talking about obesity, we're talking about lifestyle. This isn't called, is lifestyle the government's business? This
No,
doesn't have a picture of
obesity-
a lifestyle on the front of it, right?
David Satcher.
Now let's be fair. Obesity is an outcome, in many cases, of unhealthy lifestyles. It's not that simple. We differ in terms of metabolism. There are some people who can eat a lot of calories and not gain a lot of weight. There are other people who gain weight easily, so everybody's not equal. We're not stigmatizing people who are obese. Read the Surgeon General's report. Clearly says this is not about appearances, it's about health. And the way to improve health is to change lifestyles. That's what the report says.
All right, I'd like to go to the audience for some questions now.
My name is Noam Gerber, and I was curious, how would you respond to the idea that the government's role is to protect the collective rights of the citizens, which overarches the protection of every one of our individual rights, and that the increase in obesity, which represents a threat to our society, for example, the increase in rising costs of Medicaid, which we all have to which we all have to contribute to.
You're asking about whether in fact we're looking at a cost benefit between obesity on the one hand and the costs of treating people who would be ill with the diseases that this side is talking about. Am I right? So I want to take that to Paul Campos.
Yeah, well, a couple things. First of all, if you're concerned about rising medical costs, which you would be in favor of if you believe that obesity kills people, is as much obesity as possible, because what drives medical care costs through the roof is an aging population, right? That's where the health care costs get spent, right? In an elderly population, supposedly obese people are all going to die before they get to be old, right? Which is, of course, nonsense. But if you really did believe that, that's what would drive down health care costs. Secondly, and I think more fundamentally, and I just want to repeat this again, we cannot make fat people thin. Okay, so even if it was desirable from a social perspective to produce a society that did not have a lot of fat people in it, you cannot do that in a developed economy, right? We have a situation in this country where we've somehow got it into our heads that everybody can be within a certain narrow range of body mass if they have a healthy lifestyle. There's absolutely no reason for believing that that's true or that it's in any way necessary. So, I mean, I'll tell you what really would reduce healthcare costs more than anything else? I can do a back-of-the-envelope calculation right now. We can reduce healthcare costs by $1.7 trillion a year out of the $1.9 trillion that we spend by just having everybody be between the ages of 20 and 29. That would drive healthcare costs down to the floor.
It's a great question
David
that you raised. Let me just say that 80% of Medicare costs, and Medicare is the most expensive program that government support in terms of health. 80% of the costs are due to preventable diseases. And certainly half of that is related to obesity and type 2 diabetes. There's no question about it. So it is true that the government has a self-interest to try to help people develop healthy lifestyles. And we're not even talking about obesity. We're talking about the benefits of healthy lifestyles generally. Less diabetes mellitus, which is a major driver of costs of Medicare and other health programs.
So my question to all of the panelists is, what is the role of government in funding or not funding things that encourage or discourage people from being physically active?
I'd like John Stossel to take it on first.
I don't understand what you're talking about. The Highway Trust Fund is already taken from drivers who pay the gas tax, and something like 20% of it is used for things like bike paths. So it's already being spent on these things. Our government is spending $3.8 trillion. You want them to build grocery stores now? I mean, government can't even count the votes accurately, and you want them to fix lifestyle problems? This is a mistake.
Let's go to David Satcher.
Well, I think we ought to be clear. You know, we are the government, and it is the role of government to create the conditions in which people can be healthy. That's how we define public health. That's how the Institute of Medicine defines public health. It is the role of public health to create the conditions. It's a collective effort to create the conditions in which people can be healthy. And that's what we're talking about.
But aren't there more opportunities to be healthy now than ever before? Per capita income, a bicycle is cheaper than it used to be. There are more soccer leagues than there ever used to be. There's more awareness of physical activity.
I'm so sorry. Did you forget about the fact that in the grand majority of schools across this country, physical education is all but eliminated? It's gone.
Well, let's get rid
And
of
so we
government
have-
schools, and we'll have better
And then,
schools.
in addition, John, for soccer, I'm sorry, that costs money. You have to have money to buy those soccer clothes. You have to have money to join the league. And those kids don't have it. So let's just see now. We eliminated recess. We don't have physical education. And now we don't have after school. And where do they go? To the tube. They just sit there.
All right,
But
I'm gonna go to
I
another-
just have to
another
disagree with
question.
that.
I
In
just
New
wanna
York
say-
City, any kid can join a soccer league, and if he doesn't have money, the equipment will be given free. There's
Schools are
plenty of
supposed to
charities
be-
around to pay for that.
Let me,
Schools are
let
supposed
me
to do
remind you
that.
that schools are supposed to be the great equalizers in this country. In other words, kids come to school, some of them come from communities where they have adequate places to play, access to fresh fruits and vegetables. Other children come from homes where there's no place to play safely, no access to fresh fruits and vegetables. At school, at least, they should be helped in developing lifetime habits of physical activity and good nutrition.
I want to go to another question.
My question is for the panelists for the motion. Mr. Stossel pointed out earlier that the government does get involved in certain programs such as subsidizing the corn subsidies. And also, Dr. Satcher pointed out earlier with the nutrition program. And I recall reading an article where there was an exception to the nutrition program where I think it was pizza and tomato sauce were considered vegetables. So my question is, to the extent government actually got out of the business of causing obesity through subsidies and so forth, what impact would that have on affecting dietary consumption?
David Satcher.
Yeah. I think it's a great point and a great question, and I think that's exactly what's happening. I think government is beginning to change the way we spend our money relative to food, for children especially. Look at the new Nutrition Act and the difference that it represents from what we've seen in the past in terms of the way children eat in school. So I think the government is responding to the studies that we've been talking about, showing how these foods are affecting lifestyles and therefore resulting in ill health, especially type 2 diabetes, even in children. So you're right, we, the government, have been at fault in many ways in terms of what's going on in this country, in terms of subsidies, as you pointed out. And hopefully we are making the changes that we need to make. It is the role of government to continue to learn and to grow and to change. And that's what we're seeing now.
My name is Larry Parks. The question I'd like you to address is, how do you know if you get the government involved in this that it won't become politicized? The food industry gets their people on the committees to make the recommendations. And so, Dr. Satcher, you say you want healthy foods. How do you know all this won't be politicized and the recommendations, rather than being consistent with good health, are rather consistent with profits for food companies?
It's a great question. And be honest with you, I don't know, since everything becomes politicized. You know,
You bet.
As Surgeon General, you know, what I said was that I'm not a politician. I speak to the American people based on the best available public health science. But believe me, there were a lot of political pressures on me every time I did a report. But the fact of the matter is, the Surgeon General's report is based on the best available public health science. It has to be approved by the NIH. It has to be approved by the CDC. It has to be approved by HRSA. So government is imperfect, and it's up to us to continue to make it more perfect, a more perfect union. But it's up to us to continue to push the government to
Campos.
become.
I think it's really important to keep in mind that scientists are people, just like everybody else, and that science is a deeply politicized activity because it can't avoid being politicized, given that it's about power and social policy and all the things that are political all the way down. I think when we look at the food industry, one thing that people ought to keep in mind is that the food industry loves the obsession that Americans have with weight. The food industry makes enormous profits from selling people food that is supposed to make them thinner. So the food industry loves all this stuff, loves the fact that we're obsessing on these issues and trying to supposedly find a magic cure for our supposed obesity epidemic, because that's one of the main sources of its profit margins, and so it encourages this kind of social hysteria.
In a public school where 95% of students receive government assistance, whether we call it WIC or welfare, essentially it's free lunch. The lunchroom has machines filled with overpriced Doritos, chocolate chip cookies, Cheetos, etc., which many of the students purchase, often in lieu of their available free lunch that was paid for by my tax dollars. Is there data regarding specifically the percent of urban welfare recipients, how they spend their money, and where they spend their money on food.
What are you getting? What do you want to get at, though? You want to say that there's an absence of data to know whether it's working?
I think she's suggesting it's not working, that they have a free lunch, but they spend $4 on the vending machine junk. You can't manipulate people as well as we think.
My name is Safwan Shabab. If we take a step back from the debate and look at the economics of it, maybe the government side could tell us why out of all actors, government itself is the best actor to step in and solve this problem if there's a problem in the first place. Dr.
Okay, let's take that question quickly. David Satcher.
Yeah.
Why the government?
I think the government is the only actor. Remember who the government is. Public health is the collective effort of a society to create the conditions in which people can be healthy. Government calls upon all of us to work together to solve the problem. It does it through public-private partnerships. So it's not either or. We're not saying that the government does this and nobody else. We need all hands in. But if the government does not do its job, it will not get done because government has the resources, and nobody else does, to monitor the health of the population. I think the government has a role that only the government can play, but it doesn't mean nobody else does.
Very quickly, Paul Campos.
Yeah, I'd like to point out something. The health of the American population is better now than it's ever been before. I mean, all this talk of like a huge health crisis overlooks the fact that, in fact, not only is life expectancy the highest it's ever been and continuing to increase at a steady rate, but all the rates of almost all the major diseases are significantly lower than they've been before.
Life expectancy may be up, health span is down, the quality of life is decreasing significantly.
Yeah, because
We're
people who
keeping
are
people
90 are
alive
not very
who are
healthy.
grossly disabled by these diseases.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes round 2 of this Intelligence Squared US debate. And here's where we are. We are about to hear brief closing statements from each debater in turn. And remember, we had you vote before the debate. Immediately after these closing statements, which are their last chance to win this thing, we are going to ask you to vote again, and the team whose numbers have moved the most will be declared our winner. So on to round 3, closing statements by each debater in turn. Our motion is this: obesity is the government's business. And here to speak against the motion, John Stossel, Emmy Award-winning host of the weekly Fox Business Network show, Stossel.
So you talked about Medicare, and it's true, it's eating us alive. That's what's going to make us go broke fastest. So you're saying that because we have socialized medicine, which everybody loves, we have to give up our freedom and invite government to come in and control more of our lives? I don't think it's any coincidence that this biggest push for more food regulation comes at a time when Congress is obsessing about paying for everybody's health care. When government pays, it's drawn into your personal life, and this is not a good thing. It's not true that only government can do these things. Free people can control their own lives. Government will propose to control you because you eat too much. Will they next try to ban skydiving and extramarital sex? How about another try at prohibition? That might save money. Some people say, well, it's just information, and information's good, but it's not free. These calorie counts, which haven't worked, they raise the price of food a little because it costs restaurants money to post that. And they also, all this information distracts you from other information that might be more important. This happens all the time when government intervenes. You ever look at a birth control pill label? I happen to have one here. Look at this thing. It's tiny fine print, both sides. The result is nobody reads it. It doesn't make us safer. This is what government gives us.
John Stossel, your time is up. Thank you very much. Our motion is obesity is the government's business, and here to summarize his position in support of this motion, David Satcher, the 16th Surgeon General of the United States and Director of the Satcher Health Leadership Institute.
Well, let me say that I have seen government at its worst, and I've seen government at its best. I know government is not perfect. I grew up in Alabama at a time of segregation and discrimination. I was a teenager when George Wallace, running for governor, came to town and said that he would deputize every white man in Alabama before he would see one black child go to the University of Alabama. I've seen government at its worst. But I've also seen government at its best. I've seen government protect children from lead. As a medical student, I saw babies coming into the emergency room with toxicity from lead. Many of them died. That was in the 60s. In 1978, the government regulated the lead content of house paint, and we've seen a dramatic decline in lead poisoning in children. I've seen government at its best. I've been involved in the eradication of polio and all over the world, and recently learned that last year, for the first time, not one child in India suffered from polio, and only 3 countries in the world had polio, a total of less than 700 cases in the world. Government at its best is we, the people. Government is the collective efforts of a society to create the conditions in which people can be healthy. So that's what we see as government. We believe that there's no substitute for individual responsibility. Let's make that clear. That's why I wrote the prescription. But individual responsibility can only take place in an environment where there's equal opportunity. There's equal access to the opportunity for a healthy lifestyle.
Thank you, David Satcher. Our motion is obesity is the government's business. And now here to summarize his position against this motion, Paul Campos, who is author of The Obesity Myth and a professor at the University of Colorado Law School.
Thank you. I was watching the Super Bowl with my father, who's a retired physician and an oncologist, actually, and we were getting bombarded, of course, with erectile dysfunction ad drugs, advertisements. And all of them have this tagline that's legally required, right? Ask your doctor if Cialis is right for you, right? So after about 6 of these, my father turns to me and says, how the hell do I know if Cialis is right for you, right? And the point was, significant in 2 ways. One, first of all, he's an oncologist. He doesn't know anything about the pharmacology of erectile dysfunction drugs, right, just because he's a doctor, right? But the more profound point is that you would think that the question of whether Cialis is right for me is a little bit more socially complex than it could be answered by a doctor, right? You'd think there would be at least one other person who would have an opinion on that question besides a doctor, right? The point of that story really is that what is now called erectile dysfunction used to be called being 50 years old, right? In other words, we take a completely natural process and we pathologize it. We turn it into a disease so that it can be treated through pharmacological intervention. And what's really going on here, and I know that our opponents are not in any way intending this, but intention, we know what the road to hell is paved with, right? What's happening is that all this talk about lifestyle intervention is something that the pharmaceutical industry loves because they know that stuff doesn't work. And the point of all this discourse is to soften up the regulatory pipeline for the next generation of diet drugs. That's where the real money is, and that's why we're hearing about obesity all the time. Oh, we'll get kids to eat fruits and vegetables. Alice Waters will make asparagus for everybody, and we'll make lots of bicycle paths, and then kids won't be fat, but they will be anyways, and so then what will we need? Drugs. And that's what I would suggest this is really at the bottom line all about.
Thank you, Paul Campos. This is our motion. Obesity is the government's business. And speaking last in support of the motion, Dr. Pamela Peeke. She is WebMD's chief lifestyle expert and also assistant clinical professor of medicine at the University of Maryland.
As the Discovery Health correspondent, I was filming my show in South Central LA, the National Body Challenge, where we take families and we try to teach them everything we can as physicians about being healthier. It's not just about dropping weight, but being healthier. This is a small little house. It was 97 degrees in the middle of summer. There were no sidewalks, or what was there was scary looking. And we were asked to go out and take a little walk. And I looked near the front door, and there was a golf club sitting there. Now, the closest golf course is probably about 100 miles away. So I asked, what was that sitting there for? And the mother looked at me and she said, that's to beat away the dogs, the feral dogs that are running all over the place from the drug lords who are either jailed, dead, or MIA, and just so we can get to our car. And I said, you have a dog yourself. Where do you walk it? We have to drive 3 to 4 miles away to a small park, and that's what we do. So I went out and I took a walk with them because my producers told me to. And we went outside, and I took the fastest walk of my life. And as we were coming around and we were being filmed, of course, the producers were in a car, and I was on the sidewalk or whatever was out there, I noticed the dogs coming. They were about 3 blocks away. Could totally freak me out. And I realized, wow, let's break into a run. You're walking so well. Let's run. And so we did. And I ran for my life. I suddenly realized as we sat in there, as they ran into the house, and the kids were crying by this time because they were scared, they said, "Where's the cookies? It feels good." And the grandmother looking at me saying, "No, we just learned something different. Let's just pray." And I looked around and I said, wow, obesity is the government's business, because it's not really obesity, really, at the end of the day. It's wow. Health. The fitness to be able to live and survive. That's really what it's about.
Thank you, Pamela Peeke. And that concludes our closing statements. And now it's time to learn which side has argued best. We're asking you again to go to those keypads at your seat to register your vote. Again, our motion is this: obesity is the government's business. If you agree with the motion, this side's arguments, press number 1. If you disagree, this side's arguments, push number 2. If you remain or became undecided, push number 3. Remember, the side that has changed its numbers the most in the course of this evening will be declared our winner. Our motion is this: obesity is the government's business, and here are the results. Before the debate, 55% supported the motion, 19% were against, and 26% were undecided. After the debate, 55% remain in support of the motion. That has not changed at all. 35% are against. That is up 16%. 10% are undecided. The side against the motion, obesity is the government's business, carries the debate. Our congratulations to them. And thank you from me, John Donvan of Intelligence Squared US. We will see you next time.